Hello everyone. Have you ever had to fly in an airplane when there is a strong crosswind? Or when a plane gets caught in a storm? What if his engines fail? Yes, this is not the best thing that can happen to you. We wish you never experienced this. However, when something happens to the plane during flight, pilots have to put in a lot of effort and show their skills to level the plane and land without loss. In this video, we have collected for you 10 of the most extreme airliner landings that miraculously ended successfully. Are you ready to be thousands of kilometers above the ground? Let's go then. Landing on the Hudson River. It may seem strange, but sometimes one duck or another bird is enough to shoot down a plane. True, this happens very rarely, but nevertheless, here are the situations with passengers on a flight from New York to Seattle. They had to survive a splashdown on the Hudson River after a flock of gray birds attacked an Airbus A320. Less than a minute after takeoff, the plane swayed and the passengers saw flames burst from the engines. The fried birds in the engine put them out of action. The pilot in command informed the controller about the collision with a flock of birds and sent a distress signal. Seconds later, it became clear that he would not be able to keep the plane in the air and reach the runway. Risky, but the only way to save the crew of 150 passengers was to land on the Hudson, which the pilot did. As a result of the incredible professionalism of the crew, everything worked out and turned gray, but live passengers climbed onto the wings of a floating plane and began to wait for arriving rescuers. Roofless airplane. You can ride with the breeze on the fastest and steepest rides in many amusement parks, but you have never seen such an extreme. The passengers of Boeing 737 once had to descend from an altitude of 7,300 meters in an airplane without a roof, and with a hurricane wind in their face at a speed of 530 kilometers an hour. The short flight between the Hawaiian cities of Hilo and Honolulu was supposed to take only 35 minutes, but after 23 minutes, when the liner reached the required height, an explosive decompression occurred. The cockpit door and the Boeing roof over the first 6 rows flew off. Passengers found themselves in the open air at -45 degrees Celsius. Can you imagine that? They did not even have time to unfasten their seatbelts, and this, fortunately, saved their lives. True, the flight attendants who carried the drinks were scattered on different sides of the cabin. The aircraft commander began an emergency descent to 3,000 meters at a speed of more than 500 kilometers per hour, and 11 minutes after the incident, the captain landed the aircraft with one starboard engine. Fortunately for everyone, all passengers and crew members survived and were not injured. Landing over the beach. What do you usually do on the beach? Surely rest, enjoy the peace and quiet. However, only if you are not on Mayho Beach, which is located on the island of St. Martin. The thing is that the beach is in close proximity to the international airport. Airplanes fly so low that you can even be blown away by a stream of air. Of course, the local authorities are constantly warning about this. Princess Juliana Airport has a very short runway, only 2,180 meters, which makes the planes take off and land as low as possible. Sometimes planes can be as low as 10 meters above the ground, which makes all tourists turn up their heads and point their cameras at passing aircraft. Such landings near a huge crowd of people are very dangerous, and no one knows how the next landing might end. Would you be able to relax when such a giant flies over your head every few minutes? Noseless aircraft. And this story is about the heroism of pure water. On Thursday, July 27, in Istanbul, Ukrainian pilot Alexander Akapov made a heroic landing of a passenger liner of a Turkish airline at the Ataturk airport. The plane with the Ukrainian crew took off from Istanbul to Erkin, which is located in northern Cyprus. At an altitude of 4,000 feet, hail smashed the plane into the nose and the cockpit glass. The captain decided to return to the airport. There were 121 passengers and 6 crew members on board. The Ukrainian pilots and 2 Turkish flight attendants showed courage during this incident. The commander landed the plane blindly, looking only through the window. It's just incredible. When he did this, the entire apron of the Ataturk airport applauded. Pilots of other planes flashed their lights and just came on board to shake hands with Alexander. We think this is really worthy of respect. The pilot is overboard. We do not think that there will be a second person in the world who would have had a chance to ride on the roof of an airplane. Experienced pilot Tim Lancaster, who has flown more than 11,000 hours, was the commander of an aircraft flying from the UK to Spain in 1990. At 7:20 a.m. the plane took off from Birmingham Airport and headed for the sunny country. After 13 minutes the plane reached an altitude of 5,000 meters, and the commander calmly loosened his seat belts. But then there was a crash and the windshield from the commander's side flew away in an unknown direction, and the pilot himself rushed after him. By a lucky coincidence, his legs got stuck in the cockpit, and the pilot himself was nailed to the outside of the plane by a wild wind. The flight attendant grabbed the captain with both hands, preventing him from finally flying out the window. The co-pilot began an emergency descent and sent a distress signal. So they flew to the nearest airport to make an emergency landing. Frostbite, but alive Tim with broken arms was taken off the plane. After 5 months Tim was able to sit at the helm of the plane again. Passengers and crew owe their extreme adventure to the mechanic who changed the glass on the eve of this flight. On the plane, he screwed the glass with the wrong bolts, and was literally a millimeter in diameter wrong. Whatever it was, this has not been done even by the most desperate Hollywood stuntmen. Smoke cloud. The Boeing 747 was on a regular long flight from London to Auckland, New Zealand, with several stops in India, Malaysia, and Australia. But a few minutes after the night flight from Kuala Lumpur, something sinister began to happen to the plane. The cabin was suddenly filled with smoke, and the windows in the cockpit were covered with flickering sparks. This phenomenon is known to pilots as St. Elmo's lights. It can be seen on the wings of airliners during a thunderstorm, but the weather radar did not indicate a storm. In an instant, flickering white light enveloped the entire aircraft, and passengers could see flames burst from all 4 engines. To everyone's horror, they all refused. The co-pilot and flight engineer tried to restart it many times, but to no avail. It seemed that everything was lost, but suddenly a real miracle happened. At an altitude of 4,100 meters, the 4th engine suddenly started working, and then all the rest came to life. The plane was able to fly to Jakarta Airport and land there. 248 passengers and 15 crew members landed unharmed on the erupting island, and the blame for everything was clouds of volcanic ash, where the aircraft landed. Gimli Glider. Such a funny name was borne by the Boeing 767 of Air Canada. Once the 132-ton airliner, which had accomplished an amazing feat, with stopped engines neatly glided from a height of 12,000 meters and landed safely at the abandoned Gimli airbase, right during a car race. It's just incredible. But the situation was further complicated by the lack of electricity, due to which, in addition, many flight instruments were turned off, and the pressure in the hydraulic system became so low that the pilots could hardly move the ailerons and rudders. The crew showed their best skills, and no one was hurt. The cause of the incident was a mistake by the ground services of the airport in Ottawa, who confused kilograms and pounds. Just imagine, as a result, instead of the required 20 tons of kerosene, less than 5 arrived in the plane's tank. The situation was saved only by the presence in the cockpit of an experienced pilot who knew about the existence of an abandoned air base and, of course, amazing luck. Somewhere in Taiga. On September 7, 2010, in the distant Siberian wilderness, the plane Tu-154 of the airline Alrosa Company landed on the route Yakutia-Moscow. Well, what's wrong with that, you ask? The thing is that 3.5 hours after takeoff, there was a complete loss of power on board. Most of the instruments turned off, the fuel pumps stopped. As a result, it became impossible to control the wing mechanization. In the supply tank in the fuselage, the fuel supply was enough for only 30 minutes of flight. Having descended to an altitude of 3,000 meters, the pilots began to search for a suitable landing site for the 80-ton monster. And luck had a turn. Ahead appeared the concrete strip of the airport called Isma. Truth is, it turned out to be very short, only 1350 meters. The pilots, of course, were able to land a poorly controlled aircraft, but it was impossible to stop on the runway. Tu-154 had to be planted right in the village, but everything ended well, and none of the 72 passengers and 9 crew members were injured. Defective landing gear. How would you react if the landing gear was not extended on board the plane in which you are flying safely? We would definitely have sat down from such a soft landing. We think the same happened with the passengers of the liner that landed in Boston. There were 116 passengers and 5 crew members on board. For some unknown reason, the front landing gear was not fully released and the pilots decided to land the plane without it. The plane passed 30 meters nose along the runway, but nevertheless the aircraft received minimal damage and, naturally, none of the passengers and crew members was injured. The commander of the plane is definitely great and did everything right. Hurricane. Landing in a storm is not the most pleasant thing that can happen to an airliner, but unfortunately it happened when the plane landed in Hamburg. No signs of trouble. However, the strongest gusts of wind, with a speed of up to 120 kilometers per hour, associated with the passage of Hurricane Emma, began to knock him off course. Despite all the difficulties, the brave pilot decided to try to land. But when the plane almost touched the ground, a strong gust tilted the plane to the left so that at a speed of 250 kilometers per hour the left wing touched the ground. Fortunately, the pilot managed to align the liner, but the plane went out of the runway and something had to be done about it. Then the crew again lifted the Airbus into the air, and as a result, the tragedy was avoided. Having made a circle over the airport, the plane successfully landed, despite serious damage to the wing. Dear friends, if you have any exciting flight stories, then share them in the comments. And if you think that airplane pilots are real professionals, like it. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching and subscribe.